All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Definitely. Always up for a good deep dive.
Great. Well, today we're going to be focusing on the U.S. presidential race.
Specifically, the final stretch of the campaign between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Yeah. And we've got some pretty interesting source material to work with. We're looking at a recent article from the Economic Times.
And get this, it covers the final rallies before the election.
Oh, so this is like the climax of the whole thing.
Pretty much. It's November 2nd, the election's on the 5th, and things are heating up.
And according to this article, the polls are showing a dead heat.
Dead heat. It's anyone's game at this point.
Wow. So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, the article really highlights how both candidates are laser-focused on those battleground states.
Ah, yes, those all-important battleground states, always a key factor in U.S.
For
elections.
sure. And the Economic Times actually points out 7 states that could swing the election either way.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. For those who might not be familiar with U.S. elections, what exactly makes a state a battleground state?
Right, good point. So battleground state, sometimes called a swing state,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically a state where the voters aren't reliably for one party or the other.
So they're up for grabs.
Exactly. And that means their electoral votes could determine the entire election.
Ah, I see. So it's all about those electoral votes.
You got it. And in this article, they focus specifically on 2 key battlegrounds, Georgia and Michigan.
Interesting. Now, the article mentions a Trump rally at Georgia Tech and a Harris rally in Warren, Michigan.
Yep, that's right.
So what's the strategy there? Why those specific locations?
Well, both candidates are obviously trying to sway voters in these crucial areas.
Makes sense.
But the choice of locations is interesting. Like Trump at Georgia Tech. Georgia has historically been a Republican stronghold, right?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
But recently, things have been changing. The demographics are shifting, the political dynamics are changing, and Georgia's become much more competitive.
So is Trump trying to hold on to a state that's slipping away?
Exactly. And then you have Harris targeting Michigan.
Michigan. Okay, what's the story there?
Well, it used to be a Democratic stronghold.
Because of the strong labor unions, right?
Exactly. But in recent years, we've seen a decline in union membership, an increase in economic anxieties.
And that's made Michigan more receptive to Republican messaging.
You got it. So both candidates are really going after those voters who are feeling uncertain about the future.
Those who are maybe feeling a bit left behind by the current system.
Precisely.
Yeah?
And they're not shying away from attacking each other to do it.
Oh, I bet. So are we talking about the Nazi controversy? The article mentions
And
that.
that's the one. It
Yeah.
started at a previous Trump rally at Madison Square Garden, apparently.
But this article says Trump denies the label. It doesn't really provide much context, though, does it? It just mentions that Harris's camp compared his rally to a Nazi gathering from 1939. That's quite an accusation. What do you make of that?
Well, it's certainly a very aggressive tactic from the Harris camp. Whether it will sway undecided voters, who knows?
Yeah, hard to say. The article also says that the candidates are really going at it, throwing some pretty sharp attacks at each other.
Oh, yeah, the gloves are off at this point. Trump's calling Harris a fascist, and Harris is saying that Trump doesn't care about working people.
Whoa. This is getting intense. But it's not all just name-calling, is it? Trump also just announced a new policy.
That he did. At that Madison Square Garden rally, he unveiled a plan for a tax credit for family caregivers.
Interesting. Do you think that was strategic? Maybe to try and sway a particular group of voters?
It's definitely possible. It could be targeted towards what some call the sandwich generation.
The sandwich generation.
Yeah, those folks who are taking care of both kids and aging parents at the same time. They're a pretty sizable voting bloc.
Right. And they often face significant financial strain.
Exactly. So a tax credit like that could really resonate with them.
Okay, so we've got these battleground states, heated exchanges, and even a last-minute policy play. But what's the overall picture? What are the polls actually saying about who's going to win this thing?
That's where it gets really interesting. We've got polls from CNN, the New York Times, Siena College, the Financial Times, and the University of Michigan.
Yeah.
They all show a dead heat.
Seriously.
Seriously, it's incredibly tight.
Wow, you're not kidding. So, give me an example. What are the actual numbers looking like?
Okay, so for example, CNN has both Harris and Trump at 47% support among likely voters.
47%. Wow, that's close. What about the others?
The New York Times and Siena College poll has them both at 48%.
So you're saying it could really go either way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just the overall numbers that are close. Even when you look at specific issues, the polls are all over the place.
Okay. How so?
We'll take the question of economic trust. One poll puts Trump ahead,
Mm-hmm.
another gives the edge to Harris.
Wow, so even within the overall closeness, there are these little details that could tip the scales.
Yeah, fascinating.
Oh, and then we've got the 538 analysis.
Right, 538, they're usually pretty reliable.
Yeah, they crunch a lot of numbers.
So what are they saying?
Well, they give a slight edge to Harris, but even they admit it's still anyone's game.
It's like a political thriller playing out in real time. But before we get too carried away, let's make sure we're all on the same page here.
Good idea.
We keep talking about winning the election, but how does that actually work in the U.S.? It's not just about getting the most votes, right?
Nope, not at all. The U.S. operates on this system called the Electoral College.
The Electoral College. Okay, remind me how that works again.
Think of it like a game within a game.
A game within a game. Yeah. So each state is assigned a certain number of electoral votes based on its population.
Gotcha.
And a candidate needs at least 270 out of the total 538 electoral votes to win the presidency.
So theoretically, a candidate could win the popular vote but still lose the election.
You got it. It's actually happened a few times in U.S. history.
Wow. That's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, it can be a bit confusing, but it's how the system works.
And that's why these battleground states we've been talking about are so important.
Oh yeah, they're crucial.
They're not solidly for one party or the other, so their electoral votes are up for grabs.
And they could be the deciding factor in who becomes the next president.
Wow, so every vote really does count, especially in places like Georgia and Michigan.
Absolutely. And with the race this close, even the smallest shifts in voter sentiment could make a huge difference.
This is already giving me chills. It's crazy how a few snippets of information can paint such a vivid picture of the whole election.
It really is. It just goes to show that we're in the final stretch of a very tight race. Every decision made by the campaigns, every word spoken by the candidates, could have a ripple effect on the outcome.
It makes you think, what stands out to you so far?
That's a good question. You know, I'm struck by how much this election seems to be about managing uncertainty.
Managing uncertainty, what do you mean?
Well, we've got this dead heat in the polls, last-minute policy announcements, and candidates trying to appeal to voters who are feeling anxious about the future.
You're right. It does feel like anything could happen at this point.
It does. There are so many factors at play, and it's really hard to predict which way the pendulum will swing in these final days.
And that makes me wonder what will ultimately determine the outcome. Is it voter turnout, unexpected events, or something else entirely?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we'll continue to explore as we dive deeper into these sources.
All right, sounds good. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and dig into some more of the details.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to keep digging.
Great. We'll be right back after this short break.
You know, it's fascinating when you think about the historical context here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've had some crazy elections in the past.
But this one just feels different.
It does, doesn't it?
What I find really striking is how polarized the electorate seems to be.
Yeah, you can definitely feel that in the rhetoric coming from both sides.
It's like they're speaking to two completely different Americas.
And that makes those swing voters even more important, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're the ones who could really decide which vision of America prevails.
Okay, so as we go through all of this, we need to be mindful not just of what the candidates are saying, but also who they're saying it to.
Exactly. You've got to read between the lines a bit.
Before we go any further, though, can we just circle back to that tax credit policy Trump announced?
Oh, the one for family caregivers.
Yeah, that one. I'm curious about its potential impact.
Yeah, it's definitely worth examining more closely.
Because the article doesn't really give us that much detail, does it?
Not a ton, just that it's aimed at family caregivers.
Right, and that suggests he's targeting a specific demographic.
Trying to appeal to a certain group of voters.
It's interesting that he chose to announce it at that Madison Square Garden rally.
Yeah, that's not exactly known for being a family-friendly venue.
So maybe he was trying to soften his image a bit?
Perhaps appeal to a wider audience?
Right. Remember we talked about the sandwich generation?
Taking care of both kids and aging parents?
Yeah, they could be a big part of this.
They often face significant financial strain, you know.
And a tax credit could be pretty appealing to them.
For sure. And politically speaking, it makes sense for Trump to try and win them over.
Absolutely. So we've got these close polls, a new policy on the table, and a whole lot of uncertainty. What else should we be paying attention to in these final days?
Well, one thing that often gets overlooked is the power of momentum.
Momentum. What do you mean by that?
Well, sometimes a candidate can just catch a wave of positive news or energy that propels them forward.
Kind of like a snowball effect.
Exactly. And it can be triggered by all sorts of things, you know?
Like what?
A strong debate performance, a surge in fundraising, or even just a general sense that the wind is at their back.
Ah, so it's not just about the hard numbers, but also the overall feeling surrounding the campaign?
Precisely. And that's why it's so hard to predict elections with any real certainty.
Because you never know when those intangible factors will come into play.
You got it.
This is getting more and more interesting.
Every election is different.
It makes you realize how much is riding on these final days.
Absolutely. Every rally, every interview, every tweet,
Yeah.
it could all influence the outcome.
Speaking of tweets, social media has to be playing a huge role in this election, right?
Oh, without a doubt. It's like a whole other battleground.
Shaping public opinion and all that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just the candidates themselves either.
Right. Outside groups, influencers, all that.
All of that. The lines between traditional media and social media have become so blurred.
It's a constant stream of information, and it can be hard to know what to believe.
That's why it's so important to be a critical consumer of information.
To do your own research, fact-check things, consider different perspectives.
That's exactly right. And that's really what we're trying to do here today.
to give our listeners the tools to navigate this crazy political landscape.
Exactly. So to recap what we've talked about so far, a super tight race, a new policy that could really shake things up,
Right.
and of course the ever-present influence of social media.
Oh, and don't forget about those 7 key battleground states. That's where the election will be won or lost.
You got it.
It's time to put on your political analyst hats, folks, because things are about to get really interesting. We still have a lot to uncover.
I couldn't agree more. This election just goes to show you that even in a well-established democracy like the United States, the future can hinge on just a handful of votes,
Or a well-timed policy announcement.
or even just a shift in public sentiment.
It's enough to make your head spin.
But in a good way, right?
Oh, definitely in a good way. It's a reminder that we're all part of this process.
Our voices matter.
Exactly. Now, let's dive into those battleground states, shall we? Starting with Georgia.
Perfect. Georgia's become a fascinating case study.
The article mentioned Trump holding that rally at Georgia Tech, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because Georgia has traditionally been a Republican stronghold,
That's my understanding as well.
but lately it's become so much more competitive.
Because of changing demographics and all that.
All of that, and those shifting political dynamics.
So it makes sense that both candidates are fighting so hard for those electoral votes.
Exactly. And that rally at Georgia Tech, that was a clear sign that Trump is taking Georgia very seriously.
He doesn't want to lose his grip on the state.
Definitely not.
I wonder what the atmosphere was like at that rally, though.
Yeah, was it a sea of red hats, or was there a more diverse crowd?
That's a great question.
Unfortunately, the article doesn't give us many details about the rally itself.
Oh, that's too bad. It would have been interesting to get a sense of the energy on the ground.
I agree. But we can still get some insights by looking at the bigger picture in Georgia.
Okay, so what can you tell us? What's going on in Georgia?
Well, one key factor is the growing influence of African-American voters.
Right. Georgia has a large black population, and they traditionally lean Democratic.
Exactly. And that's one reason why Democrats are more hopeful about their chances in Georgia.
But it's not just about race, though, is it?
No, not at all.
There are generational divides, economic anxieties, all sorts of things shaping the political landscape.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so hard to make predictions, you know.
Yeah, because Georgia is like a microcosm of the bigger political tensions playing out across the country.
It is. Georgia's like a melting pot of different political perspectives.
So it's definitely a state to watch.
Oh, absolutely. A real bellwether state.
What happens there could tell us a lot about the overall election.
Exactly. Now, what about Michigan?
Michigan, yeah. The article mentioned Harris holding a rally there.
Yes, in Warren, Michigan, to be exact.
Michigan is another one of those states that seems to go back and forth in elections,
It's what we call a purple state.
meaning it's not solidly red or blue.
Right. It could go either way
Which is interesting because Michigan has a long history of being a Democratic stronghold.
because of those powerful labor unions.
Right, but things have been changing there too, haven't they?
They have. In recent years, we've seen a decline in union membership and a rise in economic anxieties.
Which has made the state more open to Republican messaging.
Exactly. So Michigan has become this battleground for the hearts and minds of working-class voters.
It's where the candidates really have to prove they understand the struggles of everyday people.
You got it. And that's why Harris's rally in Warren was so significant.
Because Warren is known for its blue-collar roots.
Exactly. It was a hub for auto manufacturing, but like a lot of industrial cities, it's been hit hard by economic changes.
So Harris going there was a way of showing solidarity with those working-class voters.
And trying to win back their support.
Makes sense. It's fascinating when you compare Georgia and Michigan.
What do you mean?
They're both battleground states, but for very different reasons.
Oh, you're right. Georgia is in play because of those demographic shifts and the growing influence of minority voters.
While Michigan is more about those economic anxieties and the decline of traditional industries.
That's a really good point. It shows how these close races aren't driven by just one issue, but a whole mix of factors. And that's what makes this election so interesting to follow, you know?
There's no easy answer, no clear narrative.
It's a dynamic process with so many different forces at play.
You know, I'm starting to see pattern here.
What's that?
These battleground states, they're all grappling with these same issues. Economic anxieties, demographic shifts, a sense of uncertainty about the future.
That's very insightful. And that's why they've become such important battlegrounds in this election.
They're like little windows into the national conversation.
Exactly. And the outcome in these states,
Yeah.
it could determine the direction of the whole country.
It's exciting, but also a little bit overwhelming.
I know what you mean. The weight of these decisions,
It's a lot.
but it's also a reminder of how powerful democracy is,
Yeah, it's on us to be informed and engaged.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing here today, asking the right questions.
Even if we don't have all the answers.
That's the first step.
This deep dive has been incredible so far.
We've gone from those fiery rallies and sharp attacks to analyzing policies.
And understanding those crucial battleground states,
It really shows you how a few bits of information can reveal so much.
combined with some good analysis, of course,
Of course, it's a testament to the power of critical thinking.
and looking at things from different angles.
Couldn't agree more. But amidst all this analysis, we can't forget about the human element.
That's right. At the end of the day, elections are about people,
Their hopes, their fears, their aspirations.
all reflected in the choices they make when they vote.
Every vote tells a story.
It's pretty humbling when you think about it.
It is. It reminds us that democracy is something we need to cherish.
And protect.
For sure. Well, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, I'm all ears. I'm ready for that final thought.
Well, we've been talking about how close this election is.
Yeah, razor-thin margins in the polls.
So it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
what could actually tip the scales? What could create that so-called October surprise everyone talks about?
Yeah, good question. It could be something totally unexpected, right? Like a major news event or a scandal.
Oh, definitely. Something that just throws everything off course.
Or even like a natural disaster,
Oh, right. That could shift public attention or even disrupt voting.
especially in a key state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it could also be something more subtle.
Something under the radar.
Yeah, like a shift in public opinion that the polls just don't pick up on.
Oh, I see.
Like maybe there's a surge in voter turnout among a certain group that nobody expected.
Or maybe one of the candidates has a really powerful closing argument that just resonates with undecided voters.
Like that moment in the last debate when Harris talked about her vision for the future.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It seemed to really connect with people.
It did. It's those little things that can make all the difference.
And that's why elections are so hard to predict, even with all the data and polling we have these days.
Because at the end of the day, it comes down to human behavior.
And that's always a bit of a wild card.
It's kind of exciting, though, isn't it?
What's that?
Knowing that even with all the sophisticated analysis, there's still this element of mystery to elections.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that elections are about people, not just numbers.
Real people with hopes and fears and dreams for the future.
And those emotions, those can be very powerful.
It makes you realize that every single vote truly matters.
Especially in an election this close.
You got that right. And it really underscores the importance of civic engagement, you know?
Being informed, participating in the process,
Having those tough conversations.
and most importantly, voting.
Couldn't agree more. Well, this has been quite the deep dive.
It has. We've covered so much ground.
From fiery rallies and sharp attacks to policies and battleground states.
It's been fascinating to see how it all connects.
And to think, it all started with just a few snippets of information.
A few snippets and some good analysis.
Exactly. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is this.
What's that?
No matter who you support or what the outcome is, the future of this country is in our hands.
That's a powerful thought.
It is. So let's all stay engaged, stay curious, and stay hopeful.
Because our democracy depends on each of us making our voices heard.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the U.S. presidential race.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with more insights and analysis. Until then, stay informed and stay involved.
See you next time.